like once you submitted a grade, it was done. There's like no way of sort of going back to it. It's like, yeah, it just put more pressure on committing to a grade. It felt like. So that's my thought first.
Yeah, I agree with that part. I didn't like that I couldn't go back and look at one after I had graded it. And I second, I do like all the different formats, and like how Form B, question 1 on all the versions seem to mirror each other. There were definitely some questions though that I thought were a little trickier than others. And maybe that was just my perspective. It's something that I knew my kids may not have done well on, but it might be different for other schools. I was very fortunate that a teacher in a school district very close to me was on the same table as I was. And we were able to like meet virtually and discuss questions. So I got pretty lucky. I'd be like, hey, PM, what do you think about this? And I could read it to her and we would be able to discuss some problems. But I hated not being able to talk to somebody about what grade do I give. And I didn't like in the past, there would always be that one part of the question. You're like, well, it doesn't matter. If they get an E or a P, it's going to be the same grade. I don't have to decide. You didn't get that choice this year. You had to grade every part and give it an E, P, or I. But that was good too, I guess. I don't know.
I don't know. This is going to sound bad because it's just going to sound like I'm complaining, and I don't mean to be, but that whole star system thing, it was really demoralizing. I mean, I only got down to 3 stars. It's not like I got down to 0 or something, but still just knowing it was there was just too much pressure. It was dehumanizing in a way. I didn't like it.
So maybe, Donna, you might indicate what the star system was in reference to.
Oh, well, there was a star system, and they had placed, in my opinion, relatively difficult papers to grade in amongst the rest. And if you didn't match their score, I think this is how it worked. This is as close as I can understand. If you didn't match their score, then you lost a star. So I apparently didn't match their score twice and went down to 3 stars instead of 4. It's just, why do we, I don't know, it just felt dehumanizing. In the past, when like you'd maybe score something wrong and a table leader would come over and say, tell me how you scored this, what do you think about it now? It felt positive and affirming that maybe you had a bad moment. And this whole star thing, it felt like a branding. And it was on the screen, like, well, you could make it go away, but.
Yeah, they also, in that same spot, they had, the stars, 4 stars was above expectations. I don't remember exactly, but they also had like your reading rate. How many tests per, was it tests per hour?
Tests per hour.
Yeah. And so the way it was gauged, it made you feel like if you weren't doing 19 or more, like you were falling behind. And from what I've heard, though, from other people, is the expectation was that you would grade 14 an hour. But the way the scale was set up, if you didn't, like if it was fell below 19, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm falling behind, I'm too slow. So it was kind of interesting and weird, and I forgot about it. I was so scarred by it.
Particularly since, it's always been stressed that speed isn't what's important. Mm-hmm. And there's this monitor there showing people's speed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you, Donna, about the stars and all. I think it would have been good just for the table leaders to have them so that, if you saw, like I had 3 acorns in my group, if you saw that they were struggling a little bit more, then you knew to reach out to them, maybe have a Zoom meeting with them forever, but nobody needs to see that constantly. It just, yeah, I don't think it was a good idea at all.
I kind of felt the same way. I know that you're not supposed to focus on speed, but I'm like a competitive person. So I was like competing with myself. I kept checking to like see how fast I was going. Even though I knew that like I shouldn't be focusing on it, I couldn't stop checking it.
I was curious as to your thoughts about the interaction with your table leader. Was that something that you found convenient, easy to do? How did that compare maybe with the actual reading, the table leader-reader relationship? And maybe from both perspectives, both from the perspective of those of you that were a table leader and those of you that were reading.
So I don't really want to like take the floor all the time, but I really have to say this. My table leader was awesome, but she had put some like feedback, and on the one system, it didn't tell me it was there. And I had put some in temporary hold for her to look at, and on the one system, it didn't tell her they were there. So the one system did not flag people when a communication was available.
I found that with the temporary hold also. Like I had put a couple into temporary hold and typed up a note and didn't know that my table leader had looked at them and responded and given me answers until the next day. I was like, wow, this is a long time. So I sent him a chat and he's like, oh, those, I took care of those yesterday. Go, check them and you'll see my comments. So there was that weird, it was a system issue. I don't think it was my table leader. I think he was great, but it was just not knowing that the feedback was there for me to look at, I guess.
Yeah,
Well, my table leader made it very clear that we wouldn't know and said, I mean, he figured that out on the very first days. It would put something in and he wouldn't see it, and he'd put a response and we wouldn't see it. So he said, if you're going to, if you're going to send me something to look at, or when I finish one, I'll just put it in chat and then you know. But I agree, it's the system was not the best.
So we had a pretty consistent where I had a Zoom up each day from like basically 8 until 4. And my tail sort of went in there and sort of hung out there. And for most of the time they were in silent mode, but then when I had a question, they would sort of pop in. And anybody who was on Zoom at the time would chime in and help them out. And that worked pretty well, actually. I mean, the first day they didn't have it set up and it was a nightmare because they were all asking me questions because I was the TL. And that was terrible. But then after that, once I figured that out to have the room open, they all started helping each other and became almost like, a real table, actually even more like a real table, even sort of better in that you could ask anybody a question. It wasn't just your table partner. You had a table partner and 2 or 3 elbow partners. So I was very pleased with how that worked.
Paul, did the College Board or ETS pay for the Zoom? Because a standard Zoom has a much shorter limit. You can't leave it open for that long.
I used my teacher account, so I had unlimited time and unlimited people that could use it. I
don't think everybody had access to that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I'd be happy to give them mine.
ETS could have provided and should have provided.
That's, yeah, you would think they should have had a deal with Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, I did the same thing as Paul with the Zoom, and if it wasn't for the Zoom, I don't think it would have been as good. I mean, it's really hard to discuss without both of you having the question in front of you and highlighting different parts and all via the chat. There's just too much, I guess, lag response time. You're waiting for it to come back. It's like you're texting. But once we started going on Zoom for things, also, I just think the comfort level of putting a face with a name, and people felt a little bit more comfortable, I think, like asking me questions because we spoke one-to-one. And I think just like the things that happen in the reading, I hope they never do it that way again, but if they do, I think that something like Zoom is important to use.
I was in like how one kicked you out every 20 minutes. That was annoying.
Yeah. I agree with everybody that I missed the interaction with other readers, not just my table leader. My table leader was good, and I definitely liked having the ability to like defer a paper or whatever it was, right? But I missed having that interaction with my table mates, and unlike Paul's room, we didn't have a Zoom where we were chatting. But to put a positive spin on it, I really liked not having to bubble my reader number. I liked how I could take a break. I really liked you know, that it was very efficient to get papers. I didn't have to wait for the aide to bring my packet. You know, and so I can understand like why this would be attractive to have this kind of system, but I also had a rubric I think that was pretty easy to follow. I think if we had rubrics that were trickier, then this would not be a very good system. So that's my opinion.
I was going to ask also about the training this year. Your thoughts about the training process and how that compares to the training at the regular reading.
I'm a fairly positive person, I promise. But I just really missed hearing people say their rationale for why they did things. And we got one set of papers that was like rationales provided, but then you had one set of papers, the practice set, that was just, this should have been an E, this should have been a P, this should have been an I, with no reasoning provided whatsoever. So I just felt like there was less reasoning, less chance to hear other people's questions and understand why you were supposed to grade a certain wording a certain way.
One of my readers made a suggestion, which I thought was really great. You learn so much in the big group at the regular reading when the question leader goes through the question and people ask questions, and even though they're not supposed to get into the what if, but it's like it's constantly being refined in your mind for you during that question and answer time. And, you know, maybe they could have done it where you went through that first set of practices, but then the question leader went through it as a Zoom meeting or something like that, where you just got that feedback. Because when you're reading one question and there's so many variants on it, okay, well, yeah, you accepted this, but what if it says that? And that all comes up during that time. I think it would have been helpful just to start. I mean, I'm not sure why they couldn't have done that, how you normally do it with, the debriefing on a question.
How long did the training last for each question?
If you want it.
And however long it took you to pass the two.
Oh, so once you graded your sample papers and they felt like you sufficiently scored them, then you could start grading. That's how it worked.
Right, and the way it worked is they had like a minimum number of papers, and if you scored all of them as either, it seemed like if you scored all of them as either exactly or adjacent, then you moved on after a fairly, not very many papers. If you were getting some discrepance where you were more than a couple of points off, then they would keep throwing more and more papers on you. And I know that more from the actual, after we were officially finished and we had those 2 days just to kind of play with it, I went on and tried like 12 different questions, and I didn't even bother to do much training. I just went right, I read the rubric and started to see how I did. And some of them, I mean, there were literally some that I was considered done at like 5 or 6 questions. And there were others that apparently, when I looked at the scoring, yes, I'd been off a little bit more and discrepant maybe here. And so it ended up taking maybe 12 papers. But you could do it fairly quickly if you were, scoring on rubric.
Can I ask you a question? Hi, Chris.
Oh, hey, Doug.
Am I allowed to ask
definitely.
a question?
Oh, you're always allowed to ask a question, Doug.
Yay. I always have more questions than answers. That's my problem. But anyway, so was anybody here an Acorn reader for the reading? Was at the reading for the first time this year? I'm willing to admit it. Okay. I was really hoping. It's been interesting to listen for me because I was on a rubric team this year, so my experience was very different. So just hearing the perspective from the other direction is really, really helpful. And I was just wondering if somebody who had never been at a reading had a perspective on it. Okay, thank you.
I had 3 acorns at my table.
My colleague was an acorn this year. So there were 3 of us. 2 of us are experienced readers, and then we had one who did it for the first time, Doug. And she was just, I mean, she knew what to expect, but you know, she just kept asking questions, and then we would tell her, like, this is much more civilized in person-to-person format. You know, like, you would have a conversation about this, and then you have a partner. And so I think I was very surprised that they had acorns this year. I just feel like that would be a very unusual circumstance, especially because I'm really hoping we never have to do this again. So, you know, are they going to be like, you know, I think Paul raised the same question, like, what are we going to call them if those acorns come back next year and they're doing it in person? Like, they're kind of acorns again. That's rough.
They're acorns 2.0.
Yeah, right?
I coined it right here. You heard it. Acorns 2.0.
Beta tested acorns, right?
Yeah, but they should, I think they should still be viewed, treated, and sort of taken care of like acorns, because so much would be different. Anyway.
I have a question. So my table leader didn't actually see our question until 8 o'clock the night before we started. But she'd been in training for days, I guess. So don't people usually, like table leaders, usually go ahead of time and get training on the question that they're going to do? Because she literally had no training on the question we were going to do other than what we had.
It could have been that she was not. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Paul.
She probably was on a different variant of the question, because like the one that I worked on during the pre-reading was a different variant than the one that my table ended up working on. I mean, they're similar, but there'll be little nuances that'll be slightly different. I can't believe that she wasn't on at least same question but different variant. There's no way they would.
I guess that's possible, but I just wonder. I don't know.
Normally,
I felt like that was a little odd that she wasn't on the same exact question. I don't know. Maybe because there was just too many of them.
It's quite hard to arrange all that. Logistically, that might have just been too much to distribute. I mean, I think they tried as much as possible, but you know, you had in some cases. I mean, we had 5 variants and 6 on our team, but there are others where they only had 3 on the team, and there were 4 or 5 variants. So there was no way it was going to be that was going to work out.
Yeah, Donna, I was on a team that had 3 rubric team members, and we had 5 variants. And if you count the question leader, there were 4 of us. And to be perfectly honest, we worked on the very first variant, all of us together. And we started to work on the second variant together, but we knew there was just not going to be enough time. And we were averaging 12 and a half working hours a day. That doesn't include breaks. And so we divided and conquered. Like the last few variants were like, okay, 2 of us are going on this one, 2 of us are going on this one, go. You know, we had the general context kind of, but we had to put our heads down and really, really focus, because there just wasn't enough time to do anything else. It was an unusual experience all the way around, including table leaders, rubric team members, question leaders. It was new for all of us.
And then my table was one of the ones that finished our first question even earlier than most. Mm-hmm. And we actually trained on a second question. My table leader had never seen the question at all.
Yep.
So he was in the same boat that in fact, I actually got into scoring it before he did, because it was Father's Day and he went and spent some time with his family.
Yeah.
And so I had scored, 60, 80 papers before he came back that night. And we were going through training.
We were pressed enough that I actually asked permission to take an hour off on my daughter's birthday for dinner. because we were just working. We'd get up and just work through, just straight through. So it was just time. And a lot of the things that I heard here about training and things like that, had we more time, maybe we could have put together better stuff, but there was also the format that was handed to us as well.
Let me ask one more question, and then I want to turn it over to Roxy to talk about the activities. You talked about the different variants on the questions. I just wanted to ask an overall question about what your thoughts were considering about the content of the questions. And there were 2 questions that the students had. I think one had 6 parts, is that correct? And one had 5 parts. But what are your general thoughts about the coverage of the course with the 2 questions that were given the students compared to the traditional exam that they have with the multiple choice and the 6 free response?
I thought they did a really
good job. I thought they did a really good job. And I know that we were on, we weren't including, I forget which ones we weren't including.
8 and 9.
Whatever it was.
Inference. Regression.
There was a lot that wasn't included if you think about it, but I thought that the big themes were still present, and I really enjoyed the de-emphasis on calculations and just, I don't know, some of the time-consuming stuff. Like, I really enjoyed that. I thought that was very, very nice. So, I don't know, maybe I'm alone in that, but I thought that the questions were really rich. And I thought that they gave a lot of opportunities for students to demonstrate their knowledge. And there were some definitely challenging places that, provided some variability to kind of think about, students who really understand versus students who have some basic understanding, but not deep understanding. I thought that they did a good job. I just really hated the format of the online submission and the stress, and I'm still stressed about it. I'm still very stressed about that. But I also have students that had issues, and I'm a little nervous about their scores because I still don't know if their email submissions were received. And I just hate that because some of my kids were directly affected by COVID, and they worked so hard, and I don't know. That whole thing was just very stressful for me. So.
Somebody mentioned that regression didn't seem to be covered anywhere. So I thought they did a really nice job. I really liked the questions as well, but someone mentioned that they had noticed that particular topic didn't get covered.
Regression for inference was intentionally left off, or inference for
No.
I know, but there are a lot of teachers that actually cover regression and regression for inference together.
There are, but they didn't specifically say that regression wouldn't be covered. So
I know that, but I think they were trying. I'm guessing, thinking about people on the test development committee, that they may have been taking that into consideration. That's all I can just guess that might have been what was going on in their heads.
Would have been nice if they had told us then that, if they were thinking that.
Yeah. However, would we want to not cover regression at all with our kids? Probably not.
I know I didn't review regression at all. And the big reason I didn't is in my mind, I was like, how can they get a multi-unit question that deals with linear regression? Like, how can I get, I could get a linear regression unit question, but how can I get one that covers multiple units in the course description? And I couldn't come up with a way. So I said, all right, we're just going to pray there's no regression questions. I think I got lucky.
They could have done it the same way, where it was, an experiment, and they have this, and then there's a graph to interpret and stuff like that. The thing is, do we know that in the exception test that there wasn't a regression question? So I don't know. Maybe they wanted to have something available for a different type of question. So I haven't seen those questions, so I don't know if there was, because I would have liked that too, but it's fine.
Well, it's 4:30, so about 4:30. So I'd like for us to at least have half the time to talk about activities and resources. And Roxy, maybe I can hand it over to you to take the lead.
Okay, sure. So I'll just start things off a little bit. Then it wasn't, I guess, yesterday and the day before we did the workshop for two-year college students. Sorry, not students, teachers. But that was not, that was done in webinar format, and we had close to 175 people. So we did not do activities in that session. But what I talked about when we last met in this forum is that 2 weeks prior to that, we did a multi-day workshop for two-year college instructors in the Central Valley of California that was supposed to have been a multi-day in-person workshop that then got changed to a Zoom workshop. And part of the goal on that is to kind of push some of the two-year college instructors to a more active-based learning in their introductory statistics classes, especially in that part of our state that it tends to be pretty traditional, old school kinds of courses being taught. And so one of our challenges was to think about, okay, if we're trying to get them to encourage them to do more activities and things like that in their classrooms, and now we're not able to do the hands-on activities that we normally do in those kinds of workshops. And they're all teaching online. They had just finished their semester, but it looks like in the fall we'll still be teaching online. And so if we still want to have that message, how do we do that? And so in that particular workshop, we did work hard to adapt our activity, to adapt activities to the online environment. We had about 50 people there, and that was a much more manageable group. We were in Zoom meetings, so we could make use of the breakout rooms and things like that. And so I thought I might share, just share my screen for a minute and show you the kinds of things that we did, and then we could open it up to kind of what you guys are doing as well. So one of the things that we did is we sent a supply list, a very short supply list, but we sent a supply list to all of the participants. And this is the kind of thing that you could possibly do with your students if you were thinking about moving, if you're teaching virtually in the fall as well, and wanted to still do activities. And then we did a lot of you can see in there, this was their pre-workshop assignment, but we also had between each day, we did 4 hours a day for 5 days. Between each day, they had an assignment, and a lot of the assignment involved, we gave them some assessment items and things like that to look at, but also involved some of the data collection bits of what we would normally do in person in an in-person activity. So for example, you can see here, just on this pre-one, we asked them to do the coin flipping, flip a coin 30 times, record the sequence, and then we gave them a link to a Google sheet where they would enter their data. And so that enabled us to do the activity where we have one activity where we show them a bunch of displays that students created. We told students they had to flip a coin 30 times, and then they had to repeat it 50 and count the number of heads, and they had to do that 50 times and draw their distribution. Here are what 3 students did. Which ones do you think really did it? Which ones do you think made it up? And then we look at, kind of after they make their initial assessments, we show them the graph from their flipping of coins and then ask them to reevaluate what they said. So anyway, it was just kind of a way of collecting the data, and it took a lot of the data collection pieces out. And then we actually were able to adapt quite a few of our traditional activities. So we actually did all these activities during the course of the week. A couple we just talked through, and a couple were new activities that I have to admit had not been tested with students yet. But we tried to, with each activity, we would set it up in the big group, and then we would send them off to breakout rooms to actually do the activities. I had 2 people helping me, though. That was one with 50 people. We had 10 breakout rooms, and I had 2 people helping me monitor the breakout rooms and visit the breakout rooms. But they got really into it. They were using the whiteboard, in their breakout room. They were using the whiteboard and were sharing screens with each other and in doing some of the activities. And then we would bring them back and have the kind of the wrap up or closure closure discussion, if I had asked them to contribute activities. So some of them, like the defective M&Ms, their assignment the night before was to inspect the M&Ms in their bag, inspect 50 M&Ms and classify them as either defective or not defective. And, you know, again, to put their counts in. And so we were actually able to do quite a bit by just trying to do kind of creative thinking about what we could do with breakout rooms. And so if you're using Zoom, or I think most of the other now, the other similar kinds of software formats allow for some sort of breakout room type thing. And then we tried to make it interactive by doing the Zoom polling questions and things like that as well. So anyway, I don't know if there's any particular ones you're interested in, but I just thought I would just say that it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be to take a particular activity that I'm used to doing in person, hands-on, and to think about, can I figure out a way to do this when we're not in person and hands-on with minimal, minimal requirements for them to have supplies or to buy things. We had a very short, they had to have 1 pack of M&Ms and, and a couple other things. The randomization squares was one of the activities for the randomization, and I gave them, a piece of paper with all the little squares, and one on the assignment, they had to cut them up and have them ready for the activity we were going to do with them later. But it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be, and it seemed to work out pretty well. Now these were teachers rather than students, but they all seemed to think that they could, adapt them for use with their students. Now the catch here is that you have to have at least some synchronous time with students if you're going to use the breakout rooms and things like that. So, but I was even able to do my favorite activity that probably most of you, if you've been to any of my workshops, have seen, with the cards, the cards and things. I even found a way to do that online because I found an app that would be able to do the drawing a card from a deck where I could control the composition of the deck kind of behind the scenes that they didn't know was going on. And so anyway, so that's just a little bit. And then I thought, maybe we could just talk about what you guys are doing, and if you have anything you want to share with that. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see all of your faces. So,
Roxy, are these activities that you used in your workshop available that people could access them, or is it something you could share?
Well, so that was kind of the index page from a package, the kind of the workshop package that we sent to participants. And if anybody would like to see that package, if you email me, I can email you. That's in a Word document. How we actually did those, you almost might need the combination of the activity packet and the PDF of the slides that we used, during the workshop to see how we did them together. But if you send me an email, it's just rpec@calpoly.edu. I'd be happy to share with you the slides. There were 3 days that were focused on content, and that's where these activity things came in. The other days were, one was focused on online resources that somebody else did, and then the last day was a discussion of the co-requisite implementation of the Assembly bill in California that mandated co-requisite as opposed to developmental sequences. So, but the 3 content days, I could share with you the kind of the PDF of the slides along with the activity packet if you would like to. Oh, thanks, Paul, for putting that in the.
Roxy, would it be easier if we put our email addresses in the chat in a list so that we're not all bothering you separately?
Well, except, yeah, if I had a way to copy is there a way that I can copy it? Then I have to copy and type in. I'd rather you email me separately because then I can just reply and attach rather than have to type all your email addresses.
How many people have already sent an email to Roxy?
Okay.
It's literally already in your inbox, Roxy. So
Okay, well, that's good. Yeah, I see them on coming in on my phone. So, yeah, I would just ask, that, and feel free to adapt them for your own use in classes, but some of them came from like the activities manual that goes with my textbook and stuff. So you're fine to use those, but please don't publish them anywhere. That would be the only thing I would ask on that. So what I would be interested in hearing what you guys have. Did any of you try and do kind of the equivalent of hands-on activities with your classes after you had to go virtual?
now I'll speak for myself. My district, when we quarantined, the very first 2 weeks, we were under orders from our district to not contact students in any form, not email, not Zoom, not posting things on our teacher website, nothing. And so for 2 weeks, we were completely without contact with our students. And then it was really hard to get everybody back. And for me, in a block course, we lost a huge chunk of our curriculum time. And me and the other stats teacher just tried to put together enough that we could get them to the point where we thought they might have a decent chance on the test. We are not very hopeful, and we did not feel like we had enough time to actually re-envision all that stuff.
Yeah. In some ways, I don't know what will happen in the fall. I mean, we've already been told at our university that all of the statistics courses will be virtual again for the fall. And in some ways, I think we had an easier transition in the spring because we're quarters. And so yes, the shutdown came, kind of almost at the quarter break. So we just had to move finals from winter quarter to online, and then got to start from scratch with new students in the, for this. And then they delayed the start of the spring quarter by a week to try and give faculty a little bit more time to adjust. But yeah, it's an interesting transition to have to make, and you'd have to make with no notice. And that not being able to contact your students in any way for that period of time would be rough.
Well, and the last piece that I didn't mention was that we were asynchronous until I think after the AP exam. We were not allowed to require students to be present with us online in some form. So everything we did, we had to think about how could it be done asynchronous by an individual without input from anybody else. And so in many ways, it precluded some of the activities that I've used for a long time.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of them you can do, or you can at least do big parts of them asynchronous, but the discussion and the combining group results, even the combining group results, you can do asynchronous through having people put in and then showing the display. But the kinds of discussion that you have around those things is a big part of how students learn from those kinds of activities, and that is really hard asynchronous.
Yeah. I've been doing AP Summer Institutes, obviously online through Zoom, and most of these are teachers who've never taught AP Stat before, so it's kind of like working with AP Stat students, except maybe they're a little bit more motivated. And I've been working at trying different activities with them, and I agree, Roxy, what seemed to work the best was to sort of set up the activity together and then use breakout rooms, 2, 3, maybe. I had a fairly small class, so I couldn't use as many as 4, but 2 or 3 students, and they would go work on them, collect all the data, and then come back and we'd talk about it. That seems to be about, and I've been amazed that most of the activities have actually gone fairly well. I found that I do need to go in and I either need to do a better job of explaining what they're doing in the first place, or I need to go into the breakout room and make sure that they are collecting the data appropriately, because I've discovered some where they were way off base.
Mm-hmm. And with 50 people and 10 breakout rooms, I really needed those other 2 people helping me. I would not have been able to keep up. And then they also could monitor, you know, when we were all together, they were the ones that were monitoring the chat, you know, and picking out questions that needed to be answered, because there's no way, you know, to really be talking and monitoring chat and things like at the same time. So, and it also told me that, because we were wondering now as we move to schedule these half-day ones throughout the rest of the fall, what size group would be realistic. And it pretty much told me, you know, because they're saying, oh, well, it's online. And like the 2-year ones that we had this week, you know, with 175, yeah, online you can have as many as you want, but there's just no way you can make it interactive.
Right.
Yeah, with that. So I think we're going to continue, we're going to start limiting it, keep the limit at 50 now, moving forward, if we want to maintain that interactivity.
So
Yeah.
we think we're going to be able to see our students some. So the way I've sort of set it up is I've already put out a Google form to collect the data for the first few weeks. Like, I looked at what I'm going to need, roll a dice, toss a coin, and I had a Google form and tell them to put in their results. And I put in there, please make sure you actually do it. Don't just write down what you think might happen. So like, I'm trying to get prepared in advance so that I don't have to waste any of the very small amount of time I'm going to get to see them with data collection. I want to now analyze it more. And then the other thing that I've done recently, I don't know if anybody's even heard of this, but it's called a hyperdoc. And the point of a hyperdoc is to lead students through like a discovery process, so they can watch videos, or you can have things for them to look at, or you can write out, type out script for them, or you can send them to a page in a book. And then like every once in a while you're asking them a question to like gauge how they're going through it. So anyway, I've used the Skew the Script material to try to make some hyperdocs that help my kids to, like, for instance, misleading graphs. I'm thinking that's something they can probably grasp a hold of and understand without my assistance. So I made a hyperdoc about it.
Can I ask a question, Chris?
Yes.
Have you all thought about for your upcoming year how you might adjust your curriculum expectations? I mean, I know that in the past year, we, like for high school, at least we got to cut out a couple units, but have you thought about if most of your year is taught in some format which doesn't allow you to see everybody every day, so you don't have as much time with them, of paring down, sort of filtering out some material that is not as important, and what that might be? Because we're being told to like focus on, you know, don't expect for it to be as to cover as wide a range of curriculum, to be just as rigorous as before, but not necessarily cover the breadth of it as before. And so I'm trying to, okay, great, what do I now leave out if that's the case?
I'm going to speak to that, Paul, a little bit. Like for me, I mean, I'm in a college setting, but I'm thinking about how I'm going to do my project differently, because, you know, in groups they could meet. It's just easier for them to meet together face to face. Having them organize and meet online was really challenging in the spring semester. Like it was a struggle. I ended up giving them class time because we had synchronous class meetings. I ended up giving like 2 or 3 classes of time for them to work together on their projects. And I hadn't done that before, you know? And so now it's like, okay, do I really want to give up the class time for them to work on projects, or can I somehow take the big ideas of that project and break them down into mini projects that they could do instead more individually? That might be a page or two, instead of working with a huge data set and writing up this, you know, report that might end up being 6 or 7 pages. So I, you know, just having to remove some of those projects and the time for them to work together on projects, I guess is how I'm going to hopefully save a little time or change things up a little bit.
One thing.
Oh, I was just gonna say quickly, here's one thing that I've been telling colleges asking that same question is, quit teaching middle school and high school stuff. So if you're, so, you know, they do box plots in middle school, they do scatter plots in middle school, they do, and there's a lot of things that we do in the college intro and also in the AP intro, AP stat class that kids should have seen before. And so trying to push those things to, now I'm not saying don't even mention them, but those are the things that I think could be really cut back or moved to the out of class part. You know, that could be, and those are the things that all of descriptive statistics, you know, they see standard deviation even now. And, you know, so those kinds of things, you know, maybe cut that way back and just focus on the interpretation, push the rest of it to the out of class part. And that's how I think we should buy time. Because that's what people always say, well, how do I have time for activities? And I say, well, quit teaching. They don't like it if I say quit teaching middle school stuff.
Well, Roxy, you said that. I was at the session where you said that yesterday, and you said it a little bit differently today. And when you said it today, I agree with. You said you put it to out of class time rather than just don't teach it, because I don't think we can always count on the kids coming in with the knowledge that we expect, but they may have seen it but put it out of class and then we do a little quick review of it rather than teaching it from scratch. I think that's a better way of thinking about it.
Well, yeah, or for the audience yesterday, it was move it to the co-recs, because the thing is that in mathematics, we don't make every kid repeat high school math because a few of them aren't there yet. That's where developmental math and now co-requisite went. And so I think the same thing applies in statistics. You know, why make every kid repeat middle school and high school, because not every student is there. But that's not to say they don't need to know that, but maybe that now becomes, for the college courses, that's pushed into the co-rec, just like the developmental math. It's like developmental stat. You know, you got to deal with it somehow, but we don't need to put every student through every last little detail, because there are a few that haven't seen it. So that's my, and I know that's controversial, and I say that knowing that it's kind of just to in some cases annoy and push people to at least just think about it. So
I guess for me, my big question would be, I'm wondering if the College Board should, you know, if they see that schools are going to be remote in the fall, or that there's going to be some missing hours that we would normally have. I mean, it's a generous number of hours that I get. Even Doug, if you're on a block schedule, you know, you generally have more time than a college setting. But I would be nervous to decide myself what to cut out, because, you know, that could be very different from what, you know, Paul cuts out. I don't know, I'd be nervous, but I also did do the whole curriculum this year. So I don't know, maybe I just was like.
You have to watch about, College Board will be probably very hesitant. This would be my guess, because of I think they got buy-in from the four-year colleges to accept AP results this year, even though it was a 2-question exam, you know, something that colleges would never have agreed to before. And if they say, oh, well, and now we're going to also not cover, unless they take out the early stuff, you know, so I would be shocked if College Board would say, oh, you don't have to cover this, or this, because in a heartbeat, colleges would say, that's fine, you don't have to cover it, but I don't have to take credit for it either, give credit for it. So
I think some colleges did do that this year, which is a shame.
I think they got some big systems to agree to, you know, let it go this year. But it will be interesting to see where it goes from there. So
I got a survey that I filled out yesterday that was about, if there's weirdness next year, what do you think the AP exam should look like?
Where was that survey from?
The College Board.
College Board.
I must have gone to high school teachers, because I didn't get it.
I did not get the survey.
I did.
They took a random sample.
Maybe.
Well, that's it. There's nothing random about Amy.
But what else did it ask, Donna? Now I'm interested.
Well, they wanted to know how long did you, okay, they said they were thinking about having the regular exam, but spread it out over 2 days so that schools could have half the students in the room for physical distancing. And then they said, but for schools that aren't even able to do that, what do you think it should look like? There was a question about how long do you think it should take? There was a question about whether or not you should have multiple choice questions and or free response, both or not one or not the other. And then when there was this other like option, kind of floored me. Kids might be given the performance task and they could be given it in the middle of April and have until some odd date to finish it. So like, it was almost like 4 weeks or 5. And so it was some kind of a performance assessment that would be open book, and they asked if you would like that idea or not. And if you didn't like it, they asked why.
Because it's
Who
stupid.
would grade it?
I assume they were thinking that the readers would grade it, but I don't really know.
Yeah, there are some subjects that do that, that do portfolios, you know, like computer science principles and things like that, that some of the assessments done by the in-class teachers, and then the students submit a portfolio, but not any of the ones that are as big as AP Stat.
Yeah, it's art.
I was just wondering if anybody got their CEU or professional development hours from doing the reading, and how they think College Board figured out. And obviously it's not the same amount, but it seemed less than what I expected to get, and maybe I'm just not calculating it right. Did anybody look at their CEUs?
I got 30. Did anybody else get 30?
I got 30.
And clearly not everybody did 30, like every single individual. Some people did more than 30 hours. I definitely had some readers. I was a table leader this year. Some of my readers definitely did less than 30 hours. I'm wondering if they just said, you know, oh, so Sally said somebody had 17. So maybe they just figured, we'll give you 30 if you, because there was something about if you did 85% of the 35 hours, you got your credit, your CEUs. So I'm not even sure how 17 would have worked. There was something about 5%.
I just opened up mine and it says I got 17 hours, but I know I had over 25 hours logged in the one system.
It's a step function.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I think it maxed out at 30 though.
If we're online again next year, it'll be interesting to see if they pace people differently than they did this year, because I had planned, I knew I wasn't going to be able to work much the first 2 days, so I was going to load up on the end, and then that turned out not to be possible. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I know a few people who are planning to do that, and some people just sort of front loaded. I think that I don't know that I like the idea of just giving people unlimited hours like that. I know they wanted to get it done, but I think that kind of creates a sloppiness, because you're going to have people who are going to put in a 12-hour day there, and I find it hard to believe they're going to be fully on those 12 hours, like fully focused. It just seems like it's asking for inconsistency in the grading. Because you're going to be tired. You're 12 hours on a screen, you're going to be tired.
Well, but Paul, that's why they had those checks thrown in every X number of papers.
Right, but those aren't going to catch everything. And there's only 12 of them. If you're doing 600, especially if you've already seen it, right, then you're going to probably get it to at least within adjacent. But it just seems like it was they should have just said, hey, max of 8 hours a day, because we don't grade at the reading. We don't do more than 8 hours a day. We actually do 7.5.
Now there have been days, there have been years when we've graded more because we were behind. But you're right, it usually hasn't been 12.
Right, but on those days where like there's one year they had us working until 5:30, and that last half hour was a disaster. So, and by the very fact that we ended we basically finished it all in about 4 days, tells us that that was unnecessary to allow the unlimited hours at the beginning.
Well, but also, Paul, keep in mind we had, what, 30% more readers than we normally have, and only, even if you break it, the 11 parts into questions, there was only the equivalent of 3 or 4 questions, and we had way more readers.
Right. So what I'm saying is that if they were to do this again next year, they have some numbers to work with.
Right.
Gauge better. Either adjust the number of we shouldn't be finishing just past the halfway point of the reading.
Right.
Right. So either you adjust the number of readers, or you limit the number of hours that people are doing it per day.
If we do this in this way again next year, it might put me under. I don't know that I could go through that again. And I don't mean the reading part. I mean the pre-reading part.
Oh yeah, the pre-reading was awful. That was just exhausting beyond belief. And like
I don't know how many readers would actually do it again.
I know a whole bunch that are less than thrilled about the thought of it. Let's put it that way.
Like I'm there. I'm there.
I personally feel like if it was a back to the 4-point scale for a question, that would have been easier. In terms of back reading and that sort of thing. If it was just, here's your EPI, it's 3 parts, it's a 2, it's a 3, it's a 4. Because occasionally there was I would look at the scoring and I'd be like, okay, they scored at a 6, they scored at a 7, or I scored at a 7, they scored at a 6. Who's right? Where do we differ? Where could we potentially differ? Is it part A, or is it part B? Or maybe it's part C, somewhere we're a little off. And I just didn't feel comfortable with that to a certain extent. Even though they were adjacent scores, it just bothered me.
Well,
it would have been nice if in the reading you could see how they graded each part. Like in the pre-reading, we could make notes as to how we graded each part. It'd be nice if they had that, so that if I was checking its work, I could see, all right, how they grade. To see because the most important thing is to make sure people are on rubric. And especially when you have 6 different parts now that have to be on rubric for, each one of which, as I mentioned before, it makes a difference whether it's an EP or I, right? Now, whether it's going to get the 10 or 11 or 12, those are probably all going to be sort of equivalents to a 5, I would imagine. So, it's not, but still there's always this sort of doubt, okay, especially with those middle scores, 5, 6, 7, was that a PPPPI, or was that an EPIPP, whatever, someone's going to figure out the number of accommodations you can have for that, and it won't be me.
I guess going back to Roxy's question, I think it was Roxy, about how are we going to do things this year, assessment before we get to the AP exam is another issue. How do we deal with assessment if we are in fact remote? A lot of schools didn't have to deal with that this year because they, you said you can't contact your students, or a lot of schools said, okay, the grade the student is at right now, that's the grade they're going to have, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not going to be the case if we start out the fall online and spend most of the year online. We're going to have to be assessing students. How do we do that?
Well, maybe that's a good question to end on. It's 5 o'clock now, and I hate to keep us past our time. But maybe would you like to plan another session later in July? Another 2 weeks from now, maybe, or 3 weeks? Maybe at the end of the month?
Yes.
When do most of you start back to school? Here in Georgia, there are school systems that are planning to still start like the first week of August.
We're to the third week of August.
Same as
Third
Doug.
week of August.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We start on the 17th, whatever that is. What week? I don't know what
It's
week that
third
is.
week.
Third week, yep.
Would you maybe want to plan a chat the last week of July?
Sure.
Why don't
That
we
will
say
work.
Thursday? Thursday, the last week of July, and you want to do it at 4 o'clock again Eastern time? Is that better than 3?
So you're actually talking about the 30th of July?
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay.
Hey, Chris, I think that's the day of the board meeting, but I could always share, I can't remember, I don't know if it's done by 4, but I could always share with you my Zoom if you want to lead it if I can.
Okay, that sounds good. I can do that. Well, why don't we plan on the 30th of July? You want to say 4 o'clock again? That way, maybe that'll be good for the people on West Coast. All right.
Sounds good.
Chris, it's good
Okay.
to see that you are 100% still the same, not even a little bit of a change, moving through the agenda with pace and setting the meeting for the time for the next meeting before we walk away from this meeting. That is 100% you.
That will not happen. We won't get the meeting time set otherwise. But I have changed during this social isolation. My hair is out of control. I still have not had a haircut since February, and it's driving me crazy.
Chris, would you like me to mail you some like badly filled out Scantron cards? Just
It would make me feel good. I truly missed. I didn't realize how much I would miss being in Kansas City this year, but I did miss it very, very much. Seeing all of you there and actually seeing the people on the logistics side as well, because I've gotten to know a lot of the people that work in the RMS and the logistics side, and there was just a big void this year. I started dreaming.
I say, so Paul, send them to her husband Dale and ask him to put one in every room so that you have to run around and collect them.
That's right. Just so I can collect them. That's right. So Amy, when you said you didn't miss bubbling in your name and all of that, I thought, oh no, Amy's taking my job.
We don't like to get those visits from you, Chris. I'm happier when you don't come to see me.
I know, but I do get that's my socialization is when I get to go visit people. I get to see everybody then. But
And
no,
I
it was very.
I would trade all the bubbling to not have to just be staring at a computer screen.
Yeah, that I just admire all of you for doing that. That was truly wonderful that you did that. I couldn't imagine looking at papers on a computer screen for hours on end. It was just amazing. All right, well, let's plan on seeing each other the 30th of July. And have a good 4th of July.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe and healthy.
Okay.